Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the always positive new music review show hosted by a professor of French who apologizes for the clickbait title. Is L'Impératrice too French? I am going to be reviewing their album Tako Tsubo right now, but when I ask, are they too French, I'm being misleading. I'm not asking, are they too French, meaning they aren't good because they're too French, but the question is, are they too French to get the audience that they deserve? It is a great album, it is a great band, and I'm going to be sort of exploring their Frenchness, what makes them French beyond the language, and what makes this such a good album. I do want to thank one of my auditors, Là-haut et compagnie, for suggesting this album to me. And in fact, his one-sentence description of why I should review it is a pretty good description of the entire album. He says, or she says, I don't know, it's a disco funk synth futuristic throwback. And that's pretty much what we have here, a disco funk synth futuristic throwback. Now, if we're talking about funk, and we're talking about disco, and we're talking about futuristic throwback, and then we throw in the word France, automatically everybody's mind goes to Daft Punk. I mean, if I told you that there was a jangly, poppy, wonderful group out of Liverpool, the first thing you'd think of is the Beatles. Unfortunately and fortunately, everything when it comes to EDM, especially things that tread into the zone of disco and funk and electro, all make you think of Daft Punk. And I think that's a really good comparison here with the band, but not too much. Like, I wouldn't say they are aping Daft Punk. It's more that I think that they are able to represent a lot of creativity and a lot of sounds in a similar way that Daft Punk does. I think instead of just limiting their comparison to that, I sort of want to go a little bit deeper. So yes, they have the guitar sounds of Daft Punk. That's definitely for sure. That's the one thing where you hear it and you just think, okay, and some of the production is similar. But the thing that they don't do is they don't have those moments that you have in Daft Punk where you're just like, yeah, crunchy, oh, make it faster, do it, you know, like, none of that stuff, right? It's all very kind of light and airy. And when I say airy, I also mean the band Air. I told you this is a very French album. They do remind me a lot of the band Air in the way that they are able to have a lot of this great synthesis between sort of funk and lighter sounds and kind of jazzy sounds while all being performed by actual people. What makes this band particularly interesting is there are 6 members. There's not just 2 people sitting in a room making music, as is the case with a lot of the French touch, but instead they are actually virtuosic musicians who are playing everything that you hear. But this is too superficial. If I just tell you, oh, they're like Daft Punk and Air, I'm missing out on this third category. And this is where we get to the too French question. The last track on the album is a cover of a song by someone named Michel Berger, okay? This is a kind of French singer that is not usually represented in music that Americans like, okay? So listen, I'm a Francophile, and I love French music and French culture, and I love Gainsbourg and Dutron, Brassens. I love everything about, so many things about French culture. But there's a certain kind of French music, a certain variété, and it's often called variety music, or this sort of traditional pop, rock, kind of soft, 70s, 80s feeling music that I have always just immediately rejected. I mean, the sort of king of this is a guy named Jean-Jacques Goldman, who I have never listened to even 1 second. I hear his music being played and I turn it off. But I think that's a disservice. And I think now that I've been exposed to more European music that is not cool, you know, thanks to my wife who's Serbian, I think that I, as an American who experiences other cultures, need to give in to the fact that a lot of this music that doesn't sound cool is still very good. So the fact that this band covers this song by Michel Berger, this sort of early 80s soft kind of rock, a little bit funk song, is a very clear signal that they're not just doing what Daft Punk did or doing what Air did. They're also infusing it with some of this variety sounds of French music. Now it's funny because I do know a little bit about Michel Berger because I absolutely love, or I thought I loved, the music of France Gall. Okay, she's a great French singer. She passed last year. But this is the thing. She started off well, not started off, but she attained her most popular music by singing songs written by Serge Gainsbourg, right? The great French giant who is most appreciated by Americans of all French singers, right? She only worked with him for a couple years, and she went on to make other music. And I remember listening to it. I remember going into the FNAC or whatever it was and listening to her new music and just thinking, no, this is bad. This is variety music. This is just garbage, blah. But after she passed, I did what a lot of people did, and I returned to some of her music. She has like this disco album from the 70s that's a really good disco album. And a lot of her stuff from the late 70s and early 80s is actually really quite good. And maybe it doesn't have the same coolness as Gainsbourg, but it does have a lot to it. And it turns out that Michel Berger wrote all of that music. So with that in mind, all of a sudden this album started to make a lot more sense to me. Instead of just showing up here and saying like, hey, Daft Punk broke up, but don't worry, there is still very good disco, funk, synth, futuristic throwback music for you, to quote Lao again. No, it's actually much more than that, with this addition of this other style of music. And I would actually say that Frans Gall is a really good place to start with this music, the later work of Frans Gall. The singer of this group has a very similar feeling voice. I don't think it's the same kind of voice, but it's kind of breathy. It's not a spectacular voice where you marvel at the range, but there's a character to it, and there's a sort of breathy lightness to it that reminds me a lot of Frans Gall's music, the later stuff that I only just recently have come around to liking. So here we are. We've got this disco funk synth futuristic throwback, kind of Daft Punk. It's hard not to think of Daft Punk when you see the album cover. It's got the kind of weird anime style that they used all over Discovery. But really, if I were to make a very positive Daft Punk comparison, there's one moment in the song Around the World. It's a small moment, a small little breakdown moment. And if you know the music video, which is unquestionably the greatest music video of all time, and there is nothing even close, like second place isn't even close, the best video ever made, unquestionably. There's a point, and this is the point where the mummies do this, right? If you've seen the video, you know this part, where it kind of like breaks down and just, and just that moment, that really sweet moment in Around the World, that little pocket, this little funky break. Most of this album feels like that moment in Around the World. Now that's a very specific way to describe an album, but if you know what I'm talking about, if I was watching this and someone told me that there's music that lives entirely in the moment of Around the World, I would go out and listen to it, and I really suggest that you do. Lyrically, it's a little bit hard to pin down. The title itself, Tako Tsubo, it turns out is a term for like when your heart breaks. It's a medical term, but by breaking it into two words, I thought it was like a Japanese word. Like tako is the word for octopus in Japanese, so I thought it had something to do with that. I mean, at times her voice is so breathy that in French and in English, and this album is half in French, half in English, approximately, okay? So if you're too afraid to listen to people singing in French, you're safe there. But it's hard to get a hold of what she's really singing. Now, I went and read the lyrics, and it turns out they're actually quite good. Mostly kind of dry, witty observations about human behaviors, a little bit about her own behaviors. I think the best way to summarize the lyrics on here is the lyrics I'm going to tell you right now, which I didn't hear until I read them. And they're in English, so there was no barrier whatsoever to me hearing these lyrics, but only when I read them was I able to appreciate them. Is it me I'm talking about? 'Cause I really don't know you. In the end, we carry inside slivers of a million lives. I think that's a good example of the kind of writing, very smart, questioning yourself, questioning your relationship with others. That kind of depth of lyricism is found throughout. My homework for you, okay? I do this every video. I give you an example song, because you've probably not heard of this band. Probably not. Maybe you have. I don't know. I'm not cool, so I haven't heard of cool synth bands from France, if not from my auditors here. I'm gonna give you a link to their song Peur des filles, and it's actually the music video. And I think the video also shows the artistry of the band. It's a hilariously well-made video. I compare it to if Sam Raimi directed Around the World, pre-Spider-Man Sam Raimi directed Around the World. It's like this, here's a link to it, Peur des filles, which as you will see, it's well subtitled, means fear of girls. And it features all 5 male members of the band being sort of systematically killed and decapitated, and it's very gory in a jokey way, like blood spurting everywhere, and the female singer just singing along. They're symbolically castrated, which if you've ever spent any time with French literary analysis, they are obsessed with the fear of having your balls and your penis cut off. That is just the favorite subject of many French literary critics. So when she eats the hot dogs off the grill, we understand what they're saying. But it's this very light and funny yet very deep song, because the song is all about the fear of girls and the way, it's said in a very straight way. Like, we're afraid of them. They change every month. They have different stuff down there. We need to be afraid of girls. And what if they were stronger? Then we'd really be in trouble. And it's a good example of this sort of is it too French thing, because it's very satirical, and it's really, it's easy to read as like actually being man-hating or actually being woman-hating. It's so ironic the entire way through, but yet I would say that it's sufficiently earnest. Like, I think the meaning of it is actually important, that this is the fear that, most of the violence done towards women, both emotional and physical, comes from a fear. Right? That's where most violence comes from. So it's kind of silly and goofy, and she's dancing around, and all the men are in a suit where they look like they're decapitated, and it looks a lot like the bass dancers from Around the World, and even in the chorus, the way they dance seems to be aping the Around the World dance. But the whole thing is just funny, meaningful, and then you have the song. And the song itself has this chorus that is so poppy and so catchy that before you're even done listening to the song for the first time, you have the chorus stuck in your head, and there's still 3 more times to listen to it. You turn off the song, and you just... It's just totally stuck in your head at all times. It starts off a little bit jarringly, okay? So it has like these really loud strings and people screaming, because the whole idea is it sounds of fear, this fear of girls that human beings have. But then you just pay attention to the beautiful funk synthesizers and the kind of smooth electro funk they have going here, that great, what I can only describe as Daft Punk guitar sound. And just the whole way through, it's just this beautiful, nice song. At the end, if you watch the video, it says, "Copyright, kill all men and take over the planet." And I think it really gets this. It gets the relationship between fear and hatred while also being silly. So let's get back to this question of, are they too French? I don't think so. But definitely the fact that this song is written in French means it will stop people from listening to it. And this is a thing I talk about all the time about American linguistic hegemony, right? The linguistic hegemony of English. And what I like about this album is that it's not one or the other. There's enough songs in English that if you're an English listener, you'll be happy. And there's enough songs in French that as a French professor, I'm extremely happy because a lot of the French is very clear, is very well used, and I will guaranteed use this video in one of my classes. Right? It's just very well made, very funny, very smart, and very catchy. You see, in French, when you are afraid of something, you don't use the verb être, to be. Like in English, we are afraid. In French, they have fear, avoir peur. It's a very small difference, but I think it's an important one. So there's my one song to listen to, if you're going to listen to one. I'm now going to go through the rest of the album. That's the one song to listen to. My daughter loves the video too. And she said, "Do you want me to bring down my little hand to draw with? Because there's a severed hand in the video." So thank you to my daughter for this little prop here. So let's start off with the album track by track. It's a very cohesive album. It feels like it feels like an album. It doesn't feel like a series of singles. It's very well conceived. The first track, Anomalie Bleue, has a very gentle disco opening, and then a nice breakdown, and very great disco guitar, and then the voice comes in with these blasts of like kind of funky synthesizers, and it's kind of just a sweet lust song about being at a party. it's kind of poetically written. It's like the end of a party and then she sees someone who's really handsome. But the way she describes the depressing nature of the party is quite nice. Une heure après la nuit, la foule est grise. So 1 hour after the night. So like the night's already over. It's 1 hour later. The people are all gray, which also means drunk, but also means gray. Like it's a good description of like how people are at the end of a party. And then there's a really cool bridge here. And there's almost like a straight EDM part to this song. And it's basically the only part in the entire album that I would just say, okay, this sounds like EDM music. The rest of it really feels like it's just trying to stay in this disco funk pocket, which makes sense because there are 6 musicians who actually play. And if you go online and you look them up, you can see them playing. They know how to play all these songs. Even the songs that have drum machines, the drummer can actually play them. Next track is called Fou, which I hope you know means crazy. Another song in French. There's this little breakdown with a synthesizer, this like descending synthesizer. And one of my favorite things about this record, about this album, is almost every song has a little instrumental breakdown in it that is apart from the rest of it and is charming and is well made and is fascinating. And that's this part in Fou. My favorite part of the whole album is that little instrumental breakdown. Lyrics here basically about how, you know, it's easier to be crazy because not being crazy, you have to follow all the rules of society. Okay. Hématome, which is the French word for bruise, is the next song. Very nice, simple listen, nice funk song. More synth hits here as well. The guitar is used very sparingly on here. Has kind of a weird change for the bridge. Again, always these nice instrumental bridges. And here, there's a very French lyric where it talks about confusing the heart and interest. And the French use the word interest all the time. They really mean it as self-interest, but it's one of the reasons, I think, why discourse in French can often be more interesting than in English, because I can't actually translate the meaning of the word interest to you, intérêt. You know, basically same word, but like it means like self-interest and desire to help oneself and a sense of self-love and loving oneself. There's just no translation for it. So that's a nice little detail here. Submarine is the first track in English. If you must, and you must listen to them in English, you can hear, she sings with no accent. She sings absolutely perfectly. I feel bad for all non-English artists that you have to sing in English in order to reach any international audience. It's just terrible, but very beautifully sung. Nice bass line here. My mind in quarantine, body made of plasticine. I don't need to say goodbye, do I? L'Équilibriste is maybe my favorite song on the album. I would say that Peur des filles is the most exemplary, but L'Équilibriste is just great. Has an amazing breakdown in here. Cool kind of like synthesizers doing that like very high octave play. Beautiful lyrics and phrasing. It's sort of about like not feeling like you're enough, and as a musician, feeling like you should be more. So it starts off, J'ai fait l'amour à mes névroses. I made love with my neuroses. Je les ai couchés sur la plage. You know, I slept with them on the page. And then she says, dessous, dessous. And one of the hardest things in French, and I might not even be doing it properly, the difference between above and below in French is this. Dessous, dessous. Dessous, dessous. Please, if you're a French speaker, tell me how good I'm doing. I learned French when I'm 20, so my accent is not great. You have to learn when you're younger, or be very good at languages, which I'm not. But anyway, so it's very funny hearing that in a song. Dessous, dessous. C'est un couplet que je compose, mais à bout, c'est joli, mais c'est flou. So she says, you know, this is a nice couplet that I'm writing, but at the end it's pretty, but it's fluid. It's hard to grab onto. And then she has a whole chorus about, I would have liked to have been a rapper or a computer musician, but I'm just this person. And I think if we could ask, is this band too French? They might be too good in a way to attain more popularity. Like just because they definitely aren't computer musics, they don't fit into that niche, and they're definitely not hip hop, right? And they're not quite variety enough for a more public audience. I do wonder, like, where do they actually fit in? But the music is so poppy and so good, they must fit in somewhere. Off to the Side is another song in English, almost kind of Steely Dan-ish. Another great funk breakdown and upbeat bridge. I'm going to suggest to my brother who loves Steely Dan that he listens to this song. They are very impressive musicians, what they're able to do. It's another reason why I'm on this concept of two French, you know. France is not a socialist country, but it has a lot of socialist programs, and there's a lot of support for the arts. And even though my main interest in French music is now French hip-hop, which is all made at the periphery of society, when I teach about French music, I give Daft Punk as an example of what happens when the people who come from the dominant part of society, you know, from the city center, from the more wealthy parts, when they're given access and space to grow and breathe and support from the state and support from the people, it can be a very beautiful thing. This band feels like that as well, you know, like they come from Paris, and it's very much feels like this supported, loved cultural expression, which we don't really get in America, because we don't really support art in America. Not really. We begrudgingly support art. The people do, but the government, not really. Souffle au cœur is a great instrumental song. Almost sounds like a soundtrack at times, but it highlights just how good the band is. It has a cool effect where it sounds like the radio changes to a different channel and the song changes. And there's this cool like synthesizer that just comes in ridiculously strong. The real drums are replaced by a drum loop. So there you go. Voodoo is the next track. I do teach also about Haiti, so I don't like the usage of the word voodoo in this way. Voodoo is like a real thing. It's culturally insensitive to use the word voodoo just in general. I've done it and people do it, but in the future, hopefully, we'll look back at the way people refer to voodoo and use the term and not be a great way. But it doesn't matter. The song is very cute, very catchy. It's based on this great bass synth line that's really cool because the synth line is very low, but then her voice is very high and descending. Maybe my favorite song that's in English. So if you absolutely have to listen to a song in English on this album, I would listen to Voodoo, despite the fact that it uses the term voodoo. Amazing slap bass in the bridge. This is a little bit of where the band seems to do this. Every once in a while, they'll just be like, oh, by the way, I can do this. And you don't really expect it because the rest of it isn't like that. Next track is called Digital Sunset. I'm basically going to skip it. I didn't like this one too much, but it has amazing instrumental breaks. Tomber pour la scène is this cool kind of shuffling funk song, kind of open and sparse. One thing I'd say about this album, you know, they don't have that thing that I like that Daft Punk does, which just makes you go, you know, but they do just have a nice openness and a lightness to it. You definitely hear it here. You can tell they have two synthesizer players because they really need it. There's so many different layers of synthesizers happening in here. This is curious to me, and maybe any French viewers can tell me. Scène means the stage, right? So in theory, this says fallen for the stage. And the whole thing is about like this meteorite falling, and it's falling on the stage, and it's sort of like a bright star that doesn't want to be seen anymore because it's misunderstood. Seule dans la lumière, elle s'éteint parce qu'elle ne veut plus être adulée sur un malentendu. Alone in the light, she extinguishes herself because she no longer wants to be adored for a misunderstanding, which is a kind of a beautiful idea. But is scène, does that also mean scene in the American sense of like a bar scene or like a hip happening place? I don't think it means that, but French evolves and takes more and more English, and so I haven't been in France in a couple of years. So I don't know if this means stage or if this means scene in the more American sense. I don't know. Then we end with the track Tant d'amour perdu. This is the song by Michel Berger, and the reminder of the other element of this album that makes it so great, that helps gives me direction. Okay, I've never actually listened to Berger's solo stuff, but I listened to this song and I found how great it was. And I 100% would have heard the song on the radio in France and turned it off and said, it's crap, you know, put Boris Vian back. I don't want to listen to this pop crap. But it's very good songwriting. The original has, the original song by Michel Berger, like this voice is kind of charmingly weak and it's very nice. It's funny because there's a Gainsbourg song also about lost love, Les Amours Perdus, And so it's kind of fun having the dialogue between these, like the sort of acceptable song, the acceptable cool French song, and the unacceptable pop song. And then we get the impératrice version, and it really is a love letter to this original. They don't change much, but they do what a good cover can do, which is help you to discover something. You know, last week I reviewed Lana Del Rey, and her cover of Joni Mitchell was great because that forced me to go back and reconsider Joni Mitchell. This is forcing me to do that. Et pour les auditeurs français, s'il y a d'autres artistes comme ça, comme Michel Bergère, qui sont pas assez cool, pas assez Gainsbourg, pas assez d'outrant, pour moi, américain un peu trop cool, pouvez-vous me dire, juste laisser un commentaire qui me dit, voilà, autre artiste qu'il faut pas ignorer. Parce que là, j'ignorais totalement, vraiment, Michel Bergère. Right? Yeah. Interestingly, his real name is Hamburger, I think. I think his real name was Hamburger, which is pretty funny. Because the French cannot pronounce the word hamburger. It's a joke, but it's true. I had a friend, Pierre, in grad school, and one time he was ordering a Western hamburger, and the woman behind the counter would not understand it. Ah, yes, I would like a Western hamburger. She's like, what? A Western hamburger. I was like, he would like a Western hamburger. But it's what I said. I said Western hamburger. And she didn't quite get it. He was too French. Speaking of too French, how about me having the French flag behind me? That's in my son's flag collection. I thought, why not? Okay, well, I have still got Peur des filles, stuck in my head. And I really hope you enjoy this album. I really hope you check it out. Thank you, as always, for your continued support. If you want to help me buy music, please go to my Patreon and give me money, and then I will buy music. My wife heard this album and said, I like this, I want to buy this. So maybe you can help me in that way. But don't worry about it if you can't. Thank you for watching, and there's the camera.